Welcome to the Zen Stoic Path. On this episode, we have some special guests attending. We have Keith and Ariel Amavi-Norris. Now, these two are some of my closest friends as well as the best coaches that I've ever worked with. Just to give you an idea of some of the results that I got with them, when I was working with Keith and Ariel, I basically entered into their coaching container having had 20 years of chronic back pain since I was 11 years old. And within 3 months of working with them, my back pain went down to zero and has stayed at zero ever since. And it's been over a year since I worked with them. They have a vast background in all kinds of healing modalities and are absolutely amazing at what they do. They not only create a very safe container for you to be able to express yourself in the way that you need to for your transformation, but they also are incredibly insightful in helping you to expand the possibility of what you believe you're capable of. So I'm very, very excited and honored to have them on this podcast, on this show with me today. And I'd also like to give a few updates before we get into the episode. When we're in this episode, we're going to be talking about a training that Keith and Ariel host called Psychotex. Now, Psychotex has been hands down one of the most transformational trainings that I've ever done. And it's a comprehensive training for healers, coaches, therapists, and facilitators. However, at the time of this recording, Psychotex was still the main focus. And now, Keith and Ariel have partnered with Zen Stoic to combine the training of Psychotex and the Liberation Leadership training into the Liberation Coaching Academy, which is a training that we will all be doing together. So if this training is something that you're interested in, if this training is something that resonates with you as you hear it talked about on this podcast, there is a link in the description where you can register for the Liberation Coaching Academy, and it will be one of the most transformational experiences you ever have. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. So I am super excited to have you both on here. I know this show has been a long time coming, and I will give you both a quick introduction that is not part of my intro video that I do usually before this, but one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you both on is because my coaching experience with you two as my coaches was the best one that I've ever had in my life. It was truly transformational. I went from having chronic pain in my back for 20 plus years to not having any at all. And the methodology that you use to help me get to that result and help me understand my own self-awareness and how to live within my own design and be aligned with that has changed my life in so many ways. And so I remember when we went through that, I was like, whatever it is that you're doing, I hope you teach it. And it turns out you were in the works to create something to teach it. So we'll also talk about that today, but thank you both so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So I am very curious. I know the modality that y'all work with is something that, again, I'm very excited about. It is holomorphic therapy. So can you describe what that is for those who've never heard that term? Because nobody besides us in this room have heard that term.
Right.
That's true. So holomorphic therapy is a multimodality system that is built to bring people to wholeness. So, and that's really to get them to the depths of healing, to true transformation. And so that covers a whole spectrum of different modalities and philosophies, and from psychology to shamanism and neuroscience to magic and kind of everything in between. That's kind of the high level shot of that.
Both of us have studied individual modalities in depth. And whenever you study a modality, you find out very quickly what its limits are. And what can happen, traditionally what happens is people get stuck in a modality because that's what they're trained to do. That's what their certification is. That's what they do. And when they hit the limits to that, they don't know where to go. And if the goal is client healing, it would be very, very good to have a bridge from one modality to the next modality to the next modality, and to know when each modality is effective for the client. And to be able to know when to shift back and forth between modalities to get to the healing part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, being on the receiving end of that, like I could recognize, because we're trained in some similar modalities, but then I could recognize where it went outside of what I understood. And I was like, oh, this is new. This is very unique. So It was really cool because I've never experienced a modality that very harmoniously brings in the physical body, the psyche, as well as the spiritual experience, like all into like a single harmonious way of doing things. So I thought that was really fascinating to be a part of that.
Yeah. And we are all of those things, and we are not siloed. I mean, we walk around as this mix of what you say of body, mind, and spirit. And so to silo any one of those parts out is to do the client a disservice.
Yeah, there are many tools that are really great on their own, and they all have boundaries. They all have a limitation. And part of where we got to this and in the development is every single person has their own like culmination of experiences and all of these nuances from their, astrology to their day-to-day life to like all these different experiences right down to their chemical makeup in their body. What's going on, neurochemically, all of that is different. And so if you try to his point, if you try to silo that, say, oh, well, we're only going to work on this one thing, you can only go so far. And finding a way to bridge all of those pieces and flow in and out is a really, really powerful way to bring transformation.
Yes. Yeah, I've noticed that as well, like in some of the modalities, because like one of my original modalities that I've been trained in is NLP, and I know you both are trained in NLP as well. And I realized that while there's so many awesome things about it, simultaneously you get to this point where, because NLP is very mind focused, it starts to become the mind trying to help the mind, and that can only go so far.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. If you actually look neurochemically what happens in the body, and this was my break. I don't want to say break from NLP. I love NLP, but when this was the boundary that I pushed against, was my background was more in neuroscience and working with the nervous system, and so when we would go through the exercises of like, well, we'll just clear the pain right out of we'll do it in the mind. Well, yes, that can work to a point, and often I would see that it would come back, and that is because we get all of these signals that actually get trapped in our bodies. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's an amazing book, and I think it's been misquoted and misunderstood a lot. But if we can understand that we actually have chemical signatures that get stuck in our body, so we can go in and we can do the mental work, right? And we have to allow the body to release that chemical to actually move it through. So there has to be kind of a joint piece. And so if you flip the script then and you look solely at somatics, it's not doing the mental side. It's not healing kind of that story that's going with it. It's addressing feelings. That's super helpful. But we have to do it at the same time. We have to do both, which is some of what you experienced in some of our sessions.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember just creating that link. And one of the fascinating things or distinctions that I got in the first training of the psychotext training, which we'll definitely get into that today. But one of the big distinctions that I got is that the emotions are the connection between the mind and the body. It's like they bring it all together. So even in one of the original inspirations of philosophy for this podcast, the Stoic side, right? There's typically this talk of like being very mind dominant and having like a strong mind and like never mind your emotions, or at least that's like the feel that people get when they're initially going into Stoicism, which is highly limiting, right? If you try to deny your emotions, you're denying a whole like set of information for yourself to actually be able to make decisions with. So what is I guess I would ask you two, like, how do emotions be that bridge between mind and body, and what's the importance of being able to feel through them and explore them in the way that you have done with clients?
As an example, excuse me, remember when we went into the cold plunge during the training, right? Now, typically when people get into a cold plunge, it's
Dissociate.
Get out of the pain, just get as far away from the uncomfortableness of being in the cold plunge, get away from it, and you can endure.
Yeah. Endure, embrace the suck.
Endure, embrace the suck.
They do the breathing, embrace the suck.
And it could be argued there's a time and place for that, right? People who are engaged in special forces training, for example, that is a way to get through it. The last thing you want to do is associate into the pain and sit back and feel all the feel. That's not what you're there for. But if you are now looking at this as an example of someone who is trying to heal trauma, it has to be through the emotions into the body and actually feeling the discomfort, actually literally sitting in the discomfort, which is why we coached people to get in. No, don't run from it. Get in. Are your ankles hurting? Dive into it and see what message is there.
What's inside those ankles?
What is inside the ankles? Why specifically the ankles? Why specifically the ankles and not the knees or anywhere else on your body? So it's a completely different way of using a modality to dive in and find out what's going on.
And I won't go too far in the weeds here, but like when he says, okay, why the ankles, not the knees? Well, where I was talking earlier about things get stored in the body, there could be a particular emotion that has a pathway that gets stored that's in the ankles, and that's what's being activated. Or there could be a specific trauma, remembered consciously or not, that the body is holding on to, and it's trying to draw attention there so that it can release it and heal. And so being able to tap into the emotions, right? So like sticking with the idea of the cold plunge, when we did that in training, we had some students that were like, I don't want to do this. This, in the past, this has hurt, or, and it's sure you don't have to do it, but what happens if you get in? What happens if you feel your feet? What happens if you feel your knees? And you start feeling, and what happens is we start fully associating into our bodies. People don't understand how often, like most humans are walking around totally dissociated. Our society is built on distraction. Everything is like, hey, look over here. Just, oh, well, that's uncomfortable. Let's get away from it. But if we will lean in, right? If we lean into the emotions, to your point of it being a bridge, right? It's often taught that emotions and the body and the mind are all separate, and they are not. The emotions quite naturally are the bridge. And accessing them is being willing to acknowledge them and sit with them. It's being willing to say, wow, all right, this is what's present. This is what's present for me right now. Maybe it's, anger or frustration, or I feel a little sad or lonely. Maybe it's being able to have a conversation to say, hey, this is, I'll tell Keith sometimes, hey, this is what's coming up for me. It doesn't make any sense, but I need to feel validated. Would you, give me a compliment, right? It can be something so tiny like that, but most people won't take that step. But if we'll do that for ourselves, that's where healing starts. That's where we can truly access the emotions. That's where the body can start to heal. That's where the mind, that's where everything starts to come back to say, oh, okay, this is wholeness. All of me is allowed to be here.
And one thing people can do immediately to kind of tap into this is, say you're having an emotion of anger, for instance. You might ask yourself, how do I know this? How do I know that's anger? Right? And we've discussed this in LP round. How do I know? At some point in life, I acted out a certain way, and my mom or dad said, hey, quit being so angry. Right? So now I have a verbal association with a something that's going on in my body. So if people can just go through, and this is a good way to come in to the body, is begin asking. Sadness, how do I know? Well, the obvious answer would be, well, I'm crying and mopey and, whatever else. But no, go below that. What is below that verbal label of sadness? What's below that? There's a whole world that's going on inside of your body, and we're only labeling pieces of it. And then they get grouped together in gestalts and, the whole thing from there. But
I think that's a really fascinating point, because what I start to realize in this conversation, and this has been a theme that I've been reflecting on lately, and it is experiencing the world through thoughts only and not actually being in reality. And a big theme that I've been using as part of reflection over like the last few weeks has been, it's not the reality that's creating any suffering, it's the thoughts about the reality that's creating the suffering. And the presence of suffering, it just indicates that I'm attached to a thought in that moment. And so what I find interesting about it is that if one tries to dissociate from their emotions, then they're not realizing the attachment or like the level of dissociation that they're actually experiencing. And again, we start to make decisions based off of stories that we are creating in our head versus actual real feelings about things. And, like, I feel really uneasy in my body, but it sounds like a great idea on paper. So let me just go ahead and do the thing. And those decisions typically don't result well. Or if they do, it's like only for a little bit, and then eventually there's some kind of a fall because you're not aligned with reality, or at least your reality in that moment.
And the conscious mind is really, really good at creating stories. That's what it does. It tries to justify everything and create a quote unquote logical reason why this should be so. And it will go on ad nauseum until you put the brakes on it.
And it can go fast.
It can go fast.
You know some of the stories.
Yes. And they are very interesting. They're very captivating of attention, which one thing that I wanted to ask about was, especially I came to you guys because I had a physical pain. Now, I had done a lot of work and there was a lot of progress made with the back pain. Like, it wasn't at its worst when I got to you guys, but it was at that like stubborn last bit of pain that just kept coming back. So I remember for me, the time where it really dropped off and went to a zero for the first time was the first time I acknowledged to myself anger that I had never felt before. And it was anger towards my mom for being sick, for passing away, which as a 7-year-old, I didn't think that was appropriate. So instead of feeling anger in those in moments where I should have felt angry, that it would be warranted, throughout my life, I would instead feel guilt. So somebody would do something messed up and I'd be like, what did I do? like how did I mess up here? But when I was able to finally make that realization, the pain like dropped to a zero that night and like didn't come back for a little bit. But then, it started coming back, which is when I ended up working with y'all. And then since then it's been like completely gone. So I know the physical body is usually giving us insights and clues as to what's happening. And one of the things that we talked about during the training was the model of German New Medicine, which suggests that there are emotional underpinnings to the dysfunction that we might experience in our body. So can you talk about that a little bit and how that plays out for somebody?
It's your domain.
Yeah. So yes, every single ailment, illness, it has an energetic and emotional underpinning. Absolutely. You can find that if you go through German New Medicine. You can find that through esoterics. You can find there's a whole history of information, and being able to be in the body to know what's going on. So I'll stick with Hamer's work for now. So we, according to Hamer, there are these conflicts, right? So the kind of easiest way to think about this is think about like a script that would run on a computer. Right? We have these biological scripts that say, if this happens, then run this. And so we have things like attack conflicts or territory conflicts or refugee conflicts. So a territory conflict might be feeling displaced from, a home or a relationship, right? You go through a breakup. You'll actually see if you look over the studies, you'll see a high incidence of things like UTIs or bladder infections, kidney issues when people are going through breakups. Why? Well, they have this idea of territory, these meanings associated, and that shows up in the body. And so you can, even just by kind of understanding what each part of the body does, you can get a decent idea if you're willing to ask yourself the question of like, hey, all right, what's going on? Okay, so maybe there's something going on with the urinary system. Am I having, or have I recently had, and I'll get into that in a moment, but am I having a territory dispute? Do I feel like someone is encroaching on my territory? Do I feel like someone has taken something away from me? Right? Because your body is likely asking you to like dive into that so that resolution can happen. It's holding on to the energy. It's holding on to all, like I said, the neurochemicals. It's holding on to everything, saying, hey, we have to resolve this, but that script gets turned on, right? So this conflict happens, the script runs. Well, in Western medicine, what we say is, I'm having a symptom, therefore I'm sick.
Something's
most of the
wrong.
time,
Yeah,
something's wrong, right? So I'm experiencing a sensation in my body that I find unpleasurable, right? This is not comfortable. I don't desire this. Therefore, Western medicine tells me I'm sick, something's broken, something's wrong. If you actually look at it, about 85% of the time, pretty close to that, your symptoms are occurring when the emotion has been resolved. And the body, we actually go through this a lot in training, especially when we go into level 2. The body actually has this flow of when it turns a script on, what's happening. And every one of these scripts is for survival, right? They affect different parts of the brain that have developed at different times. And so when things come online, they are for survival. You look at something like a nesting conflict, which it's what we know as breast cancer, right? If you were to take that into the animal kingdom, right? Say a little baby mammal gets hurt. The mom is going to start producing more milk. That's what that program is for. Well, now you have a more evolved species. So you get humans walking around, and our kid goes off to school, and now we have an empty nest. And we panic that, like, oh, we have to, that system comes online. Something's wrong with the kid. They're not here. Has nothing to do with it, but it's rooted in survival. It's just our conscious minds are kind of on a different page. And then Western medicine says something's wrong. And then we get scared, and then we feel grief, and then we see things move around the body. That's what it looks like, right? It's just one conflict after another. So when you can go in and you can understand what's happening in the body, what's happening emotionally, right? Use the body as a blueprint for what's going on emotionally, energetically. Then you can look and say, does something need to be resolved? Or am I healing? Is something resolved now? Actually, during training, you may remember that I had the whole thing happen with my throat. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I taught this one day, and then I went into a healing of my throat, which to anybody else would have looked like a pretty severe case of like strep throat.
Yeah, like you're getting sick during the training is
right.
What the typical narrative somebody might say.
Oh, I've been talking too much. My throat hurts. Right.
No, she was full blown.
It was.
Western medicine would have called this strep.
Mm-hmm.
My throat was literally bleeding. I had ulcers, and it was fantastic. And
all the things.
It was all the things. I looked at Keith, and I looked in the mirror, and I was like, whoa, check out this healing crisis. And he just started laughing, right? Because I knew that meant that I had reached emotional resolve. Mm-hmm. Because I understand what's happening in my body. I understand what's happening emotionally, energetically. And being able to just have that lens can empower people to, not be in this constant state of like, oh, this is happening to me.
Mm-hmm. Which can start a new emotional conflict because the story that we tell in our minds can affect how we feel. Mm-hmm. Right? Like if I'm not mistaken, we're the only animals that can tell ourselves a whole story and make ourselves sick over time.
Yeah. The idea of psychosomatic, which is recognized in Western medicine. I find it fascinating. Dr. Joe Dispenza wrote a book called, I believe it's called You Are the Placebo. And the whole book is around the fact that in order to actually study and validate clinically different medications, different treatments, they have to do triple blind studies because people's minds can actually create whatever they think. So they're taking a placebo. Oh, well, I'm supposed to have this thing. I take the placebo. I'm all better now. People will actually get better, and they're taking sugar pills. Mm-hmm. And so they have to actually isolate and have these triple blind studies where they're like, some people are getting stuff, some people aren't, and nobody knows, mm-hmm. right? It's just to see what happens because the mind is so powerful. This system in us is so powerful that when we can tap into that and start to truly understand, like what is going on energetically, emotionally, and allow resolution to take place and not interfere with it, right? I mean, you've hit me with a couple of messages like, hey, this is going on. Like, oh, congratulations, you're healing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, before this podcast, I think I was like sick for like 3 weeks. each week different with something new.
And you had just gone through a massive run of resolving conflicts.
Yeah, I bundled the inner work.
You sure did.
Very efficient.
It was.
I said, let me do all of this now.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that approach personally.
It was the first time, though, I was sick and not thinking to myself that something was wrong. Like I wasn't creating new stories like, oh no, and what if this? And like it was just, actually, some of them did come up in my mind, but I had more of a witness perspective to them, like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder where that one came from, because that's not my own. That was adopted somewhere along the way. So it was fascinating to be able to be sick and not actually have the mental fear that something is wrong, rather that something is actually healing.
Yeah. There's some great resources, that are out there. I'm actually putting some together. You're going to get all kinds of things in this next training.
Yeah.
But if for now, anybody listening, if you're willing to just recognize, like, okay, I'm noticing this thing happening in my body. What might that mean? Just the willingness to ask the question. Just the willingness to say, okay, well, what if something isn't wrong? What if my body's telling me something? You can change everything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, big time.
We had an incident with my mom recently who was in a severe auto accident.
I was hoping you'd tell this story. Right. Because this is, like, I think a perfect illustration of what y'all are talking about here.
And she spent many weeks in the hospital.
In and out.
They
let her go too soon.
And knowing what we know, working with somebody who's not really bought into this idea, right? She's an older generation. She, whatever the white coat says that's what's going to play out. We get to a certain point, and she begins saying, she's been in and out of the hospital so long, she begins saying, I just want to go home. I just want to go home. She was really in despair at this point.
Now, quick pause. Remember what I said earlier about nesting conflicts. It's not just when we now have an empty nest. This is anything around our home. So when she starts saying this is a red flag for us. We know what's coming next.
So what comes next is the nature of her accident. The entire right side of her body had been scanned, x-rayed, the whole thing.
Body.
She got T-boned in an auto accident. So everything had been, head to toe. We come into the hospital room one morning and my mom says, Ariel, can you check? I feel like I have a lump on my breast. We're like, here it is.
Now, we had not told her, just to be clear, we're not installing, suggesting anything. This is a conversation amongst us, not at the hospital. Okay, there's a pretty high likelihood if we don't get her home soon, this is going to be a problem. Or if she gets home and has to leave again, this is kind of what we're up against.
So you can tell the story better because you're the one that actually felt the lump.
So it's important to note here, the way that cancer is measured is typically cell growth and the speed at which the cells are dividing and replicating. Okay, so if they're replicating past a certain number, then it is going to be labeled malignant. If the number is, to a different end of the spectrum, then it'll be benign. So, because it's all just cells replicating. That's what's happening. So I feel this mass. I know, okay, she's in a state of active replication, right? I do not want her to get scanned. I do not want her to get a biopsy. I don't want any of that to happen because the authority is the doctor, right? Now, to be fair, the doctor saved her life. There's a time and place for this. I am absolutely not against Western medicine. I want to be clear about that. There are some things where Western medicine is amazing, and there are other places where it is not. And this is one of those places. And so we were actually in charge of her medical care. So we're like, okay, yeah, we'll get that scheduled. And I had it down to the number of weeks we needed to wait because I know how long it's going to take to slow down. She gets impatient. She books an appointment. She's a week early. I'm like, oh. She goes in. She gets this biopsy, and it comes back. First of all, the linguistics behind this, so everyone can reject this. But she says, the doctor tells her, well, if you're going to have cancer, this is the best kind to have.
Like she won a prize or something.
Right.
Right.
And so it's a low-grade, non-invasive breast cancer is what the diagnosis is. So they want her, now at her age, the answer in Western medicine immediately is a double mastectomy. Just, we can't do chemo and radiation. We're just going to just cut everything off. Let's go straight into, a surgery. So fast forward a couple weeks, I go with her to meet with a surgical oncologist. Now I know we've had enough time that this thing should have now gone into degradation. So now instead of a tumor and that fast cell replication, it should have gone effectively like necrotic, right? Where it's going backwards, right? It's getting smaller. So I asked the oncologist, hey, will you do an ultrasound? She's got the pictures from 2.5 weeks prior, maybe 3 weeks prior, up in the room. And then the machine's right there. And I'm like, she said, well, we just did one. I said, I know, but would you please? She couldn't find it. She was like, this doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense, right? So we had images going all the way through the process of from the time the mass appears to the time that it disappears on its own. In fact, she ended up having to have surgery, but not because of cancer, because they damaged a lymph node when they did a biopsy. And then they had to go take it out, right? But understanding what's going on, understanding what this cycle looks like, allowed us to keep her calm, allowed us to help control the narrative, because what happens often with cancer is, say, for example, someone gets a diagnosis of colon cancer, right? They go in, the doctor tells them whatever, this is your diagnosis, this is your timeline. Well, then they're going to have all kinds of feelings about that, right? So if they're afraid, the next thing you're going to see is it's going to show up in the lungs. It did not metastasize. They have a new conflict. This is why we have such a hard time treating cancer.
So we don't address the emotions.
Right. We don't address the emotions. We don't
act as though it's a purely mechanical disease of the body.
And we act as though it's one piece jumping, right? That it's this one thing and it's spreading through the whole body. If we will actually address it as, if we looked at each occurrence to say, oh, okay, so take someone that has cancer in multiple places in their body. What emotions are going on, right? What is the body needing help with? Because there's a part of the brain that's lit up that's causing this, that there's a script running. It's running for a reason. It's running to keep them alive. But what happens is if we start overwhelming the system, because we get afraid of this and then we're mad and then we're sad and we have all these different feelings, right? The system eventually gets overwhelmed, right? And it takes energy. It's not that diagnosis. It's not the cell. It's the diagnosis. It's the meanings associated to it, going back to the language, right? And this is, as you can imagine, a super unpopular conversation. And I'm willing to have it because I'm not a doctor. I don't have a license to lose. And I've seen this play out again and again and again. I watched this with my own grandmothers. That was plural, right? I've taken a lot of people down this journey, and it plays out every single time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen it play out with my dad. I mean, he went from having melanoma to having no symptoms in his body. And one of the things that we did is I took him through a liberation session. We resolved all the unprocessed emotions. And I, for whatever reason, right now in this moment, I think I know exactly when the healing took place that he needed and like exactly what part of the session it was. Because from my understanding, skin is around being seen, like skin stuff is around being seen. And he had a moment where he, in the session, connected and had a conversation with God, essentially, like had a conversation with his creator and felt seen by his creator finally, which he had never had until that moment. And 6 months later, he had no symptoms in his body whatsoever. And like we made a lot of other changes to reinforce like this new way of life as well, but there was nothing there.
You know, people say the worst place to go for your longevity is to go into the hospital. That's kind of the running joke, right? It's probably true.
Yeah.
Because where of all places are you just going to be inundated with things to be scared about? I mean, it's one after another,
New
after
stories,
another,
new
after
narratives stacked on top
Right.
of each other.
And doctors that don't speak to each other,
Right.
right? So things get missed and things build. You know, like I said, in some ways it's very beneficial, and in other ways it's very detrimental.
It's knowing when the time and place is to rely on certain methodologies and
Right.
when to
Yep,
when to go
totally.
to others.
You know, and thank God for Western medicine. My parents wouldn't be alive, both of them
Right.
wouldn't be alive. Now we can go into why did they call that in, the accident itself, which is a whole other
That's a whole
whole
other
other
A
can of
whole
worms.
nother podcast, I'd say. But I think one of the things that's interesting that I wanted to ask about, and I think there's a perfect segue here, is a diagnosis and like what that means and why, like what effects a diagnosis has on a person's image of self or their ability to have sovereignty.
Yeah, it's amazing. So let's take a child with ADD, right? The child goes in, the psychiatrist, you know, does whatever they do and puts a label on them as being ADD or whatever the label might be. The child's not dumb. They talk, they can go online, they can read all of what does this mean to be ADD. Now I have an identity to this diagnosis. Now I become that.
And we're tribal beings, right? We are looking for belonging. What is the one thing? So we are hyper connected. I'm doing air quotes for the listeners, right? We're hyper connected through screens. We have no real community and connection, like a tribal belonging anymore. Like that is something that our society is rapidly losing. So you take a child, like at a deep level, they are craving that. So they are going to look, and adults do this too. This is not just children, right? They're going to consciously or unconsciously look, okay, what does this mean? They're going to consciously look for what it means. And unconsciously, they're looking for their tribe, right? They're looking for who do I belong with. The word diagnosis, if you actually break down the etymology of that, so gnosis is this knowing. It is to know oneself. That is what the word gnosis means. Diagnosis is the day of knowing. Language it builds everything around us, right? How we perceive the world is deeply rooted in language. So even unconsciously, if I asked you, hey, could you do the etymology of diagnosis? If you couldn't, the collective unconscious can. And so there's a strong association to it. So when we are given a diagnosis, we are literally given an identity. That is what that translates to. It is the day of knowing oneself.
Wow.
That's why when we just, we have general practitioners saying, oh, you have anxiety or depression or, right? They mean well, right? But they're just going to give a diagnosis. They're given an identity and then all the cascade that comes from it.
Right.
You get endowed with a dysfunction of some sort.
Oh, yeah.
Like now you own this, you have this.
It's part of your identity.
Right.
Yeah, it's in fact, it's who you are. How many people completely identify when they'll tell, oh, well, you coach a lot of people, right? Oh, well, I'm this, I'm that. They'll actually use the diagnosis as I am statements. Go ahead.
That's exactly what I was going to say. They become, I am depressive. I am fill in the blank, whatever that
Anxious,
diagnosis, right?
Whatever it could be.
And yes,
Yeah.
Guess
you
what
will
happens?
be what you say you are.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I want to talk about a few terms that came up in the training that I think would be really great to discuss here. One of them I think is important, especially for this around identity, which I think the counter to these diagnoses, these identities that we adopt, is through absolute sovereignty. So can you talk about what that means?
Well, at its core, absolute sovereignty is I am responsible for everything that will happen in my life and that has happened in my life.
Everything?
Everything. Which is a jagged pill to swallow for people who have gone through traumas, right? And I get it. And when we work with people, we don't lead with the hammer right off the bat.
Doesn't work so well. I tried it.
I don't like that.
But
steps.
as we're working with people, we move them towards that. Because on a certain level, we all incarnate to learn lessons. And if you go back even further, we choose our incarnation and we choose our path. We choose what lessons we want to learn in this spin. And so if we look at it from that way, I chose every obstacle I ran up against in life. Right? And I can say that now with clarity and with
every
ease.
benefit and every
Benefit,
all of it.
everything. And in that way, I become completely empowered for my life and my life's direction. I don't look, to the government. I don't look to anybody or anything. It's me. If there's hardship in my life, I called it in. I may ask for what purpose. I may go through all kinds of spins. And ultimately it comes down, I called it in. And if I know I called it in, okay, I can sit back and go, for what purpose? What is the lesson? What is the lesson in this, whatever the hardship is? And it doesn't have to be all hardship. It can be all the beautiful things. Why did I call Ariel into my life? Because I love me and I have great taste.
Wonderful.
But if you can get to that point, if you can get your clients to that point, there is nothing that they can't do at that point. It's getting them to that bridge.
Yeah. And that's been huge. I think about, I remember hearing this quote when I initially got into personal development and coaching, which is that our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate, but that we are powerful beyond measure. And I was like, that sounds nice, but what does that mean? I'm like, why would I be scared of being powerful? Well, it turns out that you're scared of being powerful, or people generally, until they decide to claim absolute sovereignty, will be scared of their own power because it also comes with total responsibility of everything.
That's the
that has come into
flip.
your life.
Yes.
Right.
Now, I have a whole thing on this, but I'm very curious, like y'all's perspective. What's the difference between responsibility and fault? Because I feel like people are assuming
Actually, we're
fault.
ready to go.
Perfect. Well, let's get into it.
So fault is something we are conditioned to believe in because we have been told, like from the time we incarnated, you're not allowed to have authority here, right? God gets to have authority. The school gets to have authority. All these people, your boss, your parents, everybody has authority over you, right? You don't have that. Like, you're not allowed to have this. And so if we're not allowed, as we're being raised, if we're not allowed to take ownership and to be sovereign, we are automatically kind of pushed out of that. And the only thing left is people will project things and we interpret it as fault or blame. The reason that we don't lead a client session with absolute sovereignty is because if we do that, most of the time people will immediately shame spiral. See, this is all my fault. It's not about fault, right? They have to be on firm footing first of even getting into their. It's a long process, and we don't lead with it because of that. Because people immediately say, "Well, it's fault." So, in the same reason, in NLP, do you ask why, or do you say for what purpose?
Say for what purpose?
Exactly. So, fault is kind of the same thing. It's like fault falls into that why category. It creates this room for spin. And so we just establish with people, like, look, if I'm going to claim this, if I have the ability to do this, then I have the ability to do everything. And it doesn't matter if it's desirable or undesirable results in my life. If I'm going to claim one, I have to claim both. right? And that's the hardest thing. If you can get somebody to step into absolute sovereignty, this is where their health changes. This is why you don't have back pain anymore, right? This is where things change. But it's understanding that fault is a conditioned belief that something is wrong. It ties right into shame.
Yeah, and it could also, once again, become part of that identity that somebody's carrying. Because fault is just a concept about reality, but it is not reality.
Right.
It's a story. But a story nonetheless that can create emotions and conflicts within a person. So speaking of this idea of sovereignty and fault and shame and all this, tell me about the drama triangle. Because I remember this was a wonderful learning for me. What is the drama triangle?
So the drama triangle, every interaction that we have, everybody, including us, we can put ourselves in one of three positions. We can put ourselves in the
caveat. We can do one of four positions.
One of four.
One is
traditionally
outside. One is outside of the drama triangle,
right.
And the rest, what he's about to describe, is the triangle.
Right, and that is a preferred position outside of it. Completely just observing it and going, that's neat. That's cool. What happens with most people is they get caught up. They can play either one or multiple positions here. So you have someone who is a victim of whatever circumstance. You have someone who is the villain, someone who's causing the pain to the victim. And then you have what was used to be my favorite position, the victor. I come in to save the day.
I'm familiar with
Here I am to save the day. And we pass these energies just back and forth. Well, what does that set up? It's very disempowering, first of all, especially for the victim. Completely. I just completely gave all my power away
to the villain,
to the
and
villain,
to the victor.
And to the victor. I can't solve my own problems.
I need you to save me from this bad person.
Right. And so these energies just get pinged back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Now, if you look at the political arena, for instance, that's a perfect, if you want to see the drama triangle in action, look at that. And look at the people who are involved in that. There's always a victim. There is always a villain. And who plays the victor? The government. I'm here to save the day. And it just gets passed along to the point where the victim is constantly looking to the savior or the victor to save me. I'm disempowered. I can't do anything about it. I am
anything but sovereign.
I am anything but sovereign. And these energies just get passed along. They put people, and I would say they know what they're doing, but I have a little thing against it, which I'm working through.
That's my own drama triangle.
Which is a great point. We are not there yet. There is no there to get there. There is no there. There is just improvement.
Yeah.
So this has been one of my bugaboos for a while, because if we know if there is an energetic attachment to something, if there is a rile up factor, if there is a charge to it,
it's something in you.
And so it is something, always something in me. And this is something that I've worked through with Ariel's help, because she'll be like, well, that's very interesting. You have little charge to just about anything, but when you bring up the man.
That's right. Light it up.
And so I've done lots of work around that. So then if I choose, I can dive into it and start asking. I can begin to do psychognosis on this and dive into it and really, okay, let me tease these threads apart. Why am I giving my power away? If I say I'm a sovereign individual, in this instance, why am I giving my power away? Why am I in the triangle and not outside of it as the observer looking at what's going on?
Yeah. What am I secretly gaining from being in this triangle?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So being in that fourth position. So if there's drama, and this drama does not require other people.
It sure doesn't.
It's that I think
it is an inside job.
It really is.
It mostly is. Yes.
And I think that's always something I find fascinating in the coaching work is people, because we're conditioned, right? Going back to what's the idea of fault versus sovereignty? Well, look at our society. Look at how it's set up. Just that, right? Unconsciously, you're collecting all that information. Like we're inundated with it. And so this idea of, okay, well, I can't be sovereign because I need someone to save me. I need the government. I need, fill in the blank. To take the observer role is to say, okay, I am sovereign and I am choosing to recognize that I created all of whatever I'm experiencing, witnessing. I called all of it in. So I'll take all three roles at the same time and step out. And then the drama stops. And drama can just be any active story loop that is no longer serving. If it's not moving you in the direction that you want to go, you're probably in a triangle, right? And so by simply taking full and complete ownership, saying, okay, I will stand in absolute sovereignty, I'm going to step out of that, things start to change.
Oh, yeah, big time. Now, there is a caveat to that, to taking all three positions, because if you take all three and you stay in the triangle, then what happens?
Well, actually, a lot of people are there anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So you can pretty easily be in a role where on one hand, you're being the villain because you're perceiving a villain, right? But you're going to act in a certain way towards them because they're the villain. Well, from their vantage point, that would make, and this can be parts as well. So when I say it does not require other people, I have caught myself doing this with my own parts. So, you can take multiple positions, but if you're not taking it in terms of like, and I'm out, then you just jump from one spot to the other, or you play multiple spots at the same time. Like a martyr is pretty much all three at the same time.
And remaining in
Yes.
the triangle,
Yes.
not getting outside.
Right. So martyrdom, if you really start to peel that apart, every single facet of that triangle is kind of existing at once. So by being willing to say, nope, I'm going to step over here, that's where the story stops. That's where the drama stops. That's where...
The martyrs are very fun to be around. Really enjoyable company.
Working through that triangle, it's an uncomfortable process.
Very much so.
Because if you dive into it and you sit with it, you start to rub up some very inconvenient truths that you find in yourself. In my own case, in going through this, and to go back to your Marianne Williamson quote, I found that, this is really ugly. Why do I have a charge to it? Well, partly because I don't trust myself to be in that same position and wield that same kind of power without doing the exact same thing. That is something to sit with, right? And then you can go deeper into that, which I do at times. It's very uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
And it's very effective to go in, because then you can really start teasing these pieces out and these parts out, and you can deal with them. Yeah.
Very much so. Real quick, for those who are unfamiliar, what is a part?
So everybody is not just their ego. Although their ego,
At one point of knowing oneself.
that one point of knowing, they're not just that. Although the ego is very adept at saying, I'm the only one here. It tells all kinds of great stories to keep that true. What's actually going on is our psyche is fractured into multiple pieces, in multiple personalities, and taken to the extreme, multiple personalities. All of those reside within our psyche. And when triggered, certain parts will come online. These parts can have their own agenda. They can have their own set of beliefs and values. They can even act out in a change of voice, change in attitude, a complete personality change from the outside. And that's all fine and dandy. We are a conglomerate of all of this. The key is to be able to keep those parts under control. Keep them part of you, because we don't want to push them away. Pushing them away, going back to Jung, push it away, they're going to rule you, right? The key is to call these parts forward, whenever they become evident, hear them out, with the ego being in charge. The ego is kind of the barn boss or the committee chairman, whatever, we have an analogy of a bus driver and a person that's kind of the barn boss on the bus.
Oh, the chaperone.
A part starts getting really
Yes.
on the bus. That part wants to drive. That part thinks it can drive the bus better than the driver. And it's got all the reasons why that should be so. And sometimes they actually get control of the bus, and that bus goes careening off in a way that ultimately what we would call then is fate. I don't know why this happened.
Yes, those parts are what a lot of people know as impulses.
Right? Yeah.
Well, and like if you ever look at somebody, like if you ever seen somebody that dates the same person again and again, but with different faces, they have a part that has a belief. That part has a story. And every time they start into a relationship, guess who takes the wheel? This is how it's going to go. Oh, he's going to do this. She's going to do that. And they're looking for that thing. Whatever that part believes is why they're going to go through the whole cycle, the same thing again and again, until they resolve that part.
Yeah, that part is like, step aside. I know this route.
Yeah. And what happens is this is not, until we make it so, this is not a conscious act, right? We're just kind of going along life, and a part of our psyche comes online. You may hear people talk about doing like inner child work. Well, that inner child is a part, right? There are parts that are formed when we go through something traumatic. There are parts that are formed when we go through something spectacular. They're all of these things. They are these little fragments of our psyche that make up the stories that we're telling ourselves all the time. And so I like to treat my parts like kids, right? If I were driving down the road and I had on the interstate, and I have a 5 or 6 year old in the back seat that's like, hey, I can drive. I'm such a good driver. I'm not going to let that kid drive 70 miles an hour down the interstate. I'm also not going to tell them they're an idiot, they're horrible. And I'm like, oh, I bet you're an awesome driver. And one day you can show me, but not today, right? I'm going to let them talk though. And if we will allow our parts to express, and we will allow and give some conscious awareness to them, that's where we get to move towards wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very important to know too that each one of these parts has the person's highest good in mind.
Mm-hmm.
They're not here to self-destruct. They're not here to...
There's positive intent there.
There's positive intent. They might just be going about it a way that does not play out well in your reality, or take you to the direction that you ultimately want to go. Mm-hmm. And so that's the key to bringing parts together and having a conversation with these parts.
An integration into the whole psyche.
Right, because there's always, you can filter up, there's always a higher good, a higher intent. And that is a way to bring these parts together and not to push them off into the sidelines.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think what's really fascinating about this is that the parts that we make, like you were saying, that we make unconscious end up ruling your life, and we call it fate, right? Because we're disowning and shaming the parts. In other words, like shoving them into the shadows of our mind and being like, you don't get to talk. And then in those shadows, they grow into like this monster that creates self-sabotage. And people are like, I don't know why I'm doing this. Well, there may be some things you're not acknowledging. So there's that. Yeah, we're a very parts positive household, Heather and I.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So sometimes, like, if I'm like acting like quirky or weird, Heather will be like, "Are you in a part right now?" And I'm sure you can imagine her saying that.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have fun with it, and which I feel like, again, if you're looking at them as though they're like kids, which a lot of them are like kid versions of you.
That's where a lot of them are formed,
right?
As we're growing up,
Yeah,
and they're gonna
being
also
playful.
operate in that level of psychology, which is why, to Keith's point, their methodologies might not make a lot of sense in the field of logic or how things play out. But yeah, if you can be playful with them, they feel seen and heard, and life goes a lot easier.
Oh yeah,
And they come online at a time, let's say a trauma occurred to a child, a part came online to deal with that trauma,
To keep them safe.
to keep them safe, right? That part was integral to them getting past whatever event it was. But now it is part of the overall psyche.
And
it's-
that part brought with it neurochemistry. The body did what it needed to do to survive. Like whatever happened, it all worked together. So that part of our psyche and our body kicked that script on, right? Those are deeply linked together.
That's super fascinating.
And
That's,
people can
that's a
have-
whole other podcast right there.
It is.
People can have dominant parts too. I have a part we jokingly call Mac. Mac is blue collar. All he knows is work. If there's a problem, I'll just work my way out of it. Work longer, harder, just work. I might not even know what I'm doing. Dig a hole, fill it back in, but I'm working.
Do something physical.
Right, that's-
She is absolutely not kidding.
There's nothing to do here, but I'll dig a hole.
Sometimes I will wake up and we have a routine at home. We ease into our workday, which is not Mac's MO at all. Most days it goes beautiful. There's some mornings my feet hit the ground before I'm fully awake, and Mac is online.
Ready to
He
do
is
something.
ready to. He's going to turn a wrench. He's going to do something, even if it's wrong. And Ariel will recognize that, and she will go,
Good morning, Mac.
"Good morning, Mac. How's it going? What is it that you need to see today to get you to just
To feel safe.
feel
to
safe
okay.
and fulfilled, and that you've contributed?" And we'll have this discussion, because if I go into full Mac mode, that
go
creates
into
an
full
environment.
Cheryl mode.
She will go into the Cheryl mode, which is kind of the mirror of Mac.
Well, for me, my experience, and so just for anybody that's not familiar with parts, when we actually do parts work, we allow our parts. We ask them, what is your name, right? Because there's an association at an unconscious level somewhere, and by allowing them to have a name, we're bringing them even more into conscious awareness and recognizing that, okay, this is a part, right? So even to your point of Heather being like, are you in a part right now? Right? And what happens often in relationships is parts play off of each other, right? And so if I don't say, good morning, Mac, and we don't have that conversation, if I'm not really aware and I'm not really leaning into myself, Cheryl will come online. And Cheryl has this story that Mac needs to work because I'm not good enough and I didn't make enough money, and like fill in the blank.
It's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing. And what'll happen is I'll be acting out as Cheryl without recognition, and he'll be over here being Mac, and we're no longer Keith and Ariel because we're not driving the bus. Right? And then this is where conflicts happen. This is where, but by simply saying, oh, good morning, Mac. Right? Or if I have many parts, one he calls Rumple, and he'll recognize when that part is present. And so by just having a conversation and playfully, having some playful banter, and I always, we're actually both really good at this, but I'll look and say, hey, Mac, you're loved and accepted here too. Right? Like, you're welcome here, because they can sense, right, that part is its own being. And until we fully integrate it into our psyche, it's going to create some stuff.
And, this part was created at a time in my life when that was needed.
Correct.
There was a time in my life where, it was manual labor. It was work, make more money, and that's how you get ahead. That was the environment I
It was
grew
very
up in.
functional for
It was
for
functional
that point
for
in
that
time.
period. It's not functional anymore. In fact, it's a detriment for what we do now. But
Yeah.
I still love that part. I don't shun it. We have fun with it.
All of you is welcome.
Right.
Yeah, and now that we do that, Mac might pop in. It's usually first thing in the morning. Like, Mac's an early riser.
He is.
He wakes up just a little bit before Keith sometimes.
In fact, Mac does not sleep in at all.
It's ready to go.
He's ready to go. Yeah.
Since we've started acknowledging him. He'll be there, and then he's not. And there's a lot more peace. There's an ease to getting things done. And there are times when we need to, actually get a lot of things done. I'm like, hey, Mac, we need you, man.
Mm-hmm.
And man, he's there. He's
Oh,
typing away. He's doing his research.
He's like, oh, I thought you'd never ask.
Right. Right.
Ready to get to it.
Yeah.
Now, imagine if we didn't know this.
Oh, just
If I didn't know, I just
stories
woke
about
up.
conflict
Oh,
and
it would.
woke up on the wrong side of the bed. All that.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
All the
there
stories.
would be yes, all kind. And she would spin up her stories about being inadequate, not being able to do her part or carry her part of the whatever.
I'm supposed to just have all the things.
And this is what happens generally in relationships, right? You couple that with the inability to communicate clearly, and
Giving away of sovereignty all at the same time.
I mean, all the things.
So, they all start to stack. This is why we blend all the systems.
It makes perfect sense, especially when you say it that way. And I know when we were having a conversation about parts, we talked about the ego. Now, I love this conversation because I've never been a proponent of like your ego is bad or your ego is your enemy. Like, I think that's ridiculous.
Right.
Especially what's all the rage today in the spiritual community is getting
Ego death.
ego death and getting rid of your ego. And it's like, first of all, your ego didn't die because your ego is telling me this story right now about how your ego died. So your ego took a nap.
But my ego is more evolved.
It's totally dead. My ego died, said the ego. But I thought y'all had a really fascinating perspective on the ego and its role with the parts. And it actually is a very heartening perspective around the ego. And actually, because I think just the idea or the aspiration to, throw your ego out by taking a tug on your bootstraps is ridiculous. So what is the function of the ego relative to all the parts?
Right. So in trying to explain the human psyche is a difficult process because it's beyond words, right? It's like a psychedelic journey. It's beyond words. You can't really bring it back in totality. But the way I see the ego, the way we see the ego is that central entity that is or should be the committee chairman of all the parts. He is the one he or she is the one that is in control. It is the one that's calling the shots, and it is extremely powerful, right? We talk about killing the ego. It's a horrible idea. Because
Don't do that.
Because in the absence of ego, what happens then?
All the parts show up.
All the parts show up.
At once.
At once. There's a mutiny on the ship, right? So being a Navy guy, I like to see the captain of the ship as being the higher self. Just underneath the higher self is the ego. This is the executive officer. This is the one that you only get to see the captain if you come through me, because the captain's got a lot on his plate. If you want to address the captain, you have to come through me. In the absence of that executive officer, anyone from the ship could just bum rush the captain. So the ego plays that role in my explanation of the human psyche. So he is extremely powerful, and he wants nothing more than to serve the captain. That's his highest elevation, is to serve the higher self.
Mm-hmm. Which this just had me have a funny realization, which is, you've seen this, I'm sure, when one person is accusing the other person of having ego, reality of probably what's happening is one part of that person is accusing another part of being in the ego, none of which is true, and causes all kinds of unnecessary conflict.
There's lots of projection going back and forth. And, yes.
Yeah. So one of the things I really wanted to ask today, and I'm excited that we're getting to this point, is about this one term, because this really blew my mind and was funny at the same time, which is the fortified blind spot. What is the fortified blind spot?
Oh, you're looking at me.
Yeah, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, so the fortified blind spot, put simply, is when we have something that is absolutely running us and we don't see it at all. And what typically happens where we see fortified blind spot most commonly is in the coaching world. So it's typically unconscious, not always. Sometimes it's very conscious. It's typically an unconscious move. But what happens is someone has a wound. They have a trauma. They have something that they push up against in their life, and they start looking for answers, right? They start looking for resolution. And they learn some things, they learn some tools, they learn some tactics, and they get just a couple of steps ahead of maybe a few other people. And then all of the sudden, they're the expert. As soon as someone pays them for advice, and sometimes it's not even paid for, sometimes people just say, oh, hey, I know you were dealing with that. How did you do it? It is this immediate fortification of, oh, see, I got it figured out, right? Because actually truly resolving is often uncomfortable. It's often a process. And so what we see happen a lot is people will start, they'll be the relationship coaches. I see relationship coaches all the time, and knowing what's happening behind the scenes is like, what are you doing? Why are you teaching relationships? Because you're like in the middle of a divorce and none of this is figured out. And it's not, like I said, there's a line of where it's happening unconsciously, and then, okay, well, yeah, this is happening and we're making these conscious decisions. But it becomes this whole world of I'm the expert in this thing, and therefore I don't have to heal it.
Mm-hmm. I don't have to deal with it. I can just help everybody else.
Right.
Deal with
I'll
it.
help everybody else. And as long as I keep helping everybody else, they'll see me as the expert, and no one will notice, including myself, that this gaping wound is driving everything in my life.
Oh, yeah. And yeah, the coaching world, I think, is where you see a lot of that, whether it's relationship coaching, wealth coaching, health. I mean, like, I've seen it all. Where it's either a blind spot or a blind spot that I've spackled. I'm not dealing with it.
A little duct tape.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
It's fine.
And I'll tell you, it's tough because whenever we bring a client in, we are bringing in our projection. It's an aspect of us.
I've noticed that as well.
It never fails.
Okay.
So if you really want to get deep into coaching, that is going to be present. You don't have to. We choose to work on ourselves repeatedly, because client comes in, I guarantee you they're going to bring something up that we're like, ooh. Oh.
And sometimes not immediately.
Right.
We've had clients come through where we know about how long it will take to resolve certain things. And if we hit that point and we're not seeing the progress, we will do a deep dive with each other. Okay, where do you see this in me? Because we're both bringing a piece of it, right? So where is this? So I'll ask myself, where is this in me? And I'll ask Keith, where is this in me? And he'll ask himself, where is this in me? And he'll ask me, where do you see this in me? Because if we don't resolve it in ourselves, that client, they're not going to resolve it. The client's success is directly tied to your level of ownership as a coach.
Which is one of the reasons why I respect and regard the training that y'all are putting together, and now that I get to also be a part of, why I hold it in such high regard. It's because it is one that is coming from a place of being congruent, as within, so without. And so knowing that as long as you resolve what's within, or you will resolve at the same pace that you want your clients to be able to resolve. So the more you look within and ask, where is this showing up in me, the more capability other people who come to you have that ability to heal, which I wanted to ask. And, before we wrap up, I really wanted to talk about this one last piece here, which is psychotex. Right, the training that essentially everything that we've talked about so far in this podcast is really a part of. It's part of the whole psychotex framework and system. So number one is, who is psychotex for, and what is it?
So psychotex is for coaches, healers, therapists, facilitators that want to hone their craft, that want to actually be able to provide transformation, to guide people. We don't provide it, we show them how to get it for themselves, right? But to have the tools and the resources, that you're not running up against the boundaries of every system, that you know how to flex and flow and cover mind, body, spirit, their interplay, and to flow in and out of techniques. That's who it's for.
And I would say that it's outward facing, right? We give tools for people to work with clients coming in, but as we just discussed, it's inward facing too. What do you do when you have this projection come into you and you reach a point where you're like, I've had the very uncomfortable experience of having to tell a client, I don't know. When I resolve this in me, I can help you.
I think that client was Victor.
But
That was me, actually. Yeah.
But until it's
What do you know?
Now, fortified blind spot, I could have gone, oh, well.
Yeah, you do it this way.
Well,
let me just
tell
make
you.
it up real quick.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But
Which, just to that point around like the power of psychotext being something even for the person learning it, I would say that I've made more progress in my inner work that I've done on my own without a coach because of the tools and skills I learned in psychotext than any other time in my life. Like I've been able to be self-sufficient because of what was learned there. Like it allows you that no matter how lost you feel, you can always find your way with these tools
Right.
and like the way that y'all have taught them. So I just want to say that as like a testament to how powerful the ability to weave in and out of different modalities and to know when to switch is for a person's own personal inner work.
It is. As above, so below. I mean, we are calling these clients in. If you look at it this way, we are calling certain clients in an attempt. Our higher selves are calling this in to resolve it in ourselves. And we resolve it in ourselves, it'll resolve for the client. But to take that 100%
For us, we
ownership,
show them how. Yep.
and that's tough. I mean, that means that we continually have clients coming in, which means we are continually working. When we leave here today, the conversation going, I'm sure we will be working.
There'll be some things.
It's a 24/7 operation for us. It always is. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that many trainings are designed or it's implied that when you go through this training, you'll do some work on yourself. You know, I've never seen a training advertised that is like, well, you know, you won't get any benefit from this on your own, only professionally. And I would like, just to reflect what you were just sharing, we spent so much time like orchestrating the class to bring transformation for each student, each participant, as individuals, so that you have those tools for yourself first and foremost. You have the resiliency, you have the everything that you need, and that makes you an exponentially better coach or therapist or facilitator. And that level 1 program for us is really like it's the cornerstone of moving towards becoming a holomorphic therapist. We don't actually let people just come into the higher levels, right? You can apply for level 1 and level 2, but level 3 is by invitation only. And there's actually there's a wait time, because as you start to move beyond, this is when you start moving towards becoming a holomorphic therapist. And we desire for people to really understand that when they get to like, oh, I have this problem, I would like to seek counsel, I would like to seek help, I need a holomorphic therapist, because they're one that's not operating in fortified blind spots. They're really truly doing the work. We want that to actually mean something. We want that to be we want our students to live that before they get to go on to the advanced, the advanced stuff.
Which I think is brilliant that's how the system is being created. And one of the reasons why like I align with it and why I wanted to be part of its growth and creation is because of that there. I mean, like there have been a lot of other training systems that I've been to, different coaching companies and personal development, that you can essentially just buy your way through all the certifications, but you'll see a lot of people that despite having master level certifications or trainer level certifications in different systems are not living it. They're not living what they're teaching. They are not embodied in the teachings. And this is the first thing that from its inception is being created as like the person who's facilitating all of this work and using all these tools. The only way they were able to get to that point is by embodying the teachings.
Yeah, and when we first began talking about, were we going to put together training to teach people what we do, the first thing Ariel said is, I will not now, not ever, teach a modality unless I am living it. It's just, that's a hard stop for me. That's a hard no. Yeah. And so we do every bit of this every day.
And you can attest to this. What did we ask in class? If you see us not living it, call us out. If we have a blind spot and you see it, we want you to call it out. And that's not because like, oh, we're spectacular. I mean, we are pretty awesome. And that's not the point, right? Right? The point is we desire to lead transformation, right? And the only way that we can really do that is first we have to live it in order to truly lead. And the students need to do the same, right? This is how we create change that lasts. This is how we create true transformation and allow people to actually find wholeness and healing. And, at the end of level 1, people will be a better coach or therapist than, I don't even know how to quantify. Your skills will be up-leveled so much. Level 2 is even beyond, right? And so for those that don't wish to go all the way through to become a holomorphic therapist, every level up-levels you and your ability to guide others and your ability to earn income and your ability to heal yourself, right? It just gets better as you go.
Yeah, and it essentially prepares you for anything a client can come to you with.
Yes.
Right.
And they can come to you with all kinds of things.
All kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so, I would definitely say, like if there are people listening to this who experience incessant negative self-talk or limiting narratives that no matter how much work they've done or how many books they've read or coaching that they've done, it keeps going, that this is the type of training for them because it'll actually allow you to pull the thread on all of that and get to the root so that you may release that. Or if somebody continues to experience patterns of self-sabotage, which are probably parts. But if you continue experiencing self-sabotage, I'd say like this is the training for you as well.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, we have people go through level 1 that are not coaches or, they have their own life. They come just for them to heal and transform, and that's amazing too. We love that.
These tools are for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always talk about on this podcast the whole metaphor of the warrior in the garden, how, the samurai master with his student says, you talk to me about living a life of peace and then, you also prepare me to destroy people in battle. So like, how do you reconcile the two of these? Why not just tend to the garden here? And he says, because it is better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in the war. And for me, in our modern day, right, we may not be literal warriors who are always having to, defend our village or whatever the case may be. But the warrior today, or the modern warrior of what we experience in, this truly miracle of like a way of life that we get to have without having to be in constant conflict in certain parts of the world, the way that we train ourselves as the warrior is through understanding of the body, mind, and spirit, and how to truly have sovereignty in all 3 realms and not have to give that sovereignty to someone else. And Psychotex is the path to truly having that within the person.
Yeah.
Mm.
So
well put.
Yes. So if somebody's interested in applying for the training or learning more about Psychotex, where can they find you guys?
They can go to psychotex.com. There's information, and there's also an application page if they want to go ahead and apply. We'll book a call with them.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And they can also reach out to me if they already know me and want to ask about the training.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it is truly a beautiful body of work that is being created here, and I am very grateful to be part of it. So I have one last question. For each of you So I guess you could each answer individually, but what does it mean to you to live a liberated life?
I can go first. For me, it is to live as a sovereign individual, fully empowered, fully sovereign, fully responsible for all the good, all the bad, and all the in-between that comes into my life.
Thank you.
I should have gone first because
Because it was that.
That's why I went
He totally took my answer.
he took it. Yes, I would reflect that. For me, to be liberated is to recognize that it is my creation. You know, I have a tattoo on my arm that's plata o plomo, which is the silver or the lead. And there's a long story behind it, but essentially it is the reminder that the choice is always mine, right? Even if somebody put a gun to my head and said, do this or else is still an option. It is still my choice. It may be a weighted choice, but it is mine. And that's, for me, what I would call a liberated life.
Thank you both so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. This is how the channel grows, and I couldn't do it without you. So I'm very grateful for your engagement and for your willingness to share this show with the people that you care about. If you want to take the next step, be sure to go to zenstoic.com to get the sovereign awareness technique. This technique is a free technique that will show you how to develop a deep sense of self-trust and intuition so that you can make effective decisions that are authentic for you. So be sure to go to zenstoic.com to get the sovereign awareness technique, or go ahead and click the link in the show notes below.